So as many will probably know by now listening, the show is an adaptation of the very popular books by Leigh Bardugo of the same name, which is the first of a trilogy, and also another called Six of Crows, which is the first in a follow-up duology. So it's a kind of amalgamation. The world of both the books and the show is the Grishaverse, where the kingdom of Ravka is where most of the action takes place and where war rages. The Grisha themselves are magical beings who they can summon, they can heal, they can do a variety of things. At first, our orphaned heroine, Alina, who's played by Jessie May Leigh, she's just a lay member of the Ravkan army. She's a young map maker. And along with her best friend, who's played by Archie Reno, she's sent on a mission through the Shadowfold. The Shadowfold is a permanent dark mist that divides East and West Ravka. It's been there basically for time immemorial, and it's populated by deadly flying creatures, basically. Shock horror on the mission, things don't quite go to plan, and they are attacked by these creatures. Just when they seem to be doomed, Alina suddenly manages to repel these creatures in a way that suggests that she is in fact a member of the Grisha. And she may just be a very special Grisha with the power to kind of eradicate this sort of perma-shadow thing that is splitting the country in two. Suddenly she's highly sought after, firstly by Ben Barnes, leader of the Grisha army. He wants to harness this power that she has and train her up. Also by an opportunistic band of young criminals who hear there's a price on her head. Right, so the first thing to say is that this is a world that's so clearly defined by borders, by barriers like the Shadowfold, like race, like identity, like allegiances. There's this war going on with neighbouring factions, possibly multiple wars. It's quite a complex kind of situation. There's nationalism going on, there are persecuted races. But so much of the narrative, the story, is driven how these things are fluid. You know, characters change allegiances during the story. Unlikely bonds are formed. In many ways, it's a story of unity fighting against kind of tyranny and division. I think the best bit about this aspect is that it's an addition to the show. It's the fact that, being an adaptation, there have been many changes, or a number of changes. Alina has been made mixed race. She is half Ravkan. She's also half Shuhan, which is a sort of Asian-inspired race that neighbours Ravka, with which the Ravkas are at war with. So she faces kind of discrimination against her in a sense. And that, I think that in itself is a thought-provoking element, but all that stuff, but throwing it into a story that is so much about differences of identity and kind of partisan feelings and war and all that stuff, I thought that it gave an extra real-world relevance to a fantasy show set in a magical land. You know, you expect a degree of like relevance to the real world, but I thought that this was the way that it did that best. I think the second thing to mention is that in combining the two stories, the original the trilogy and this follow-up duology, that I believe, I haven't read any of them, I believe they are completely independent narratives. The Six of Crows one comes afterwards, I believe. And I think that it was bold to do this. It was always going to be kind of, it sounds to me like a difficult thing to do while maintaining the kind of what made the stories good on the page. I think it was bold, but it does work. To me, it works on screen. It feels like the two strands are a natural combination. I think fittingly, the episode when the two strands, the two plot lines combine, when they meet up, I believe this is episode 5, and from what you've told me, I don't think you've quite reached this episode yet. I think that's the best episode of the show. And when the third plot strand, there's this love story that involves Danielle Galligan's character, when that joins the other main two, and I think it was nicely done that sets up the next season. So that kind of shows that all these kind of different elements, these different storylines have been mashed together in a way, and that shows that the adaptation, which the main thing about the adaptation is combining these two series, the fact that all that stuff works well together shows that it's been well made. I think part of the reason those two central plot lines work together is the strength, particularly, of the Crow characters, who are really well played, charismatically played, and they've all got their different strengths. Despite Freddie Carter's, he's got this default glare. I can't imagine this guy playing anyone who's, purely a hero in anything or purely a good guy in anything, because he's just got this face that is made, it's almost pure evil, his default expression. Despite that default glare, Freddie Carter, I think, manages to bring a kind of depth and likability to that character. Kit Young, he kind of provides the show's comic relief as a kind of sharp shooter character. And then I thought that Mita Suman was really strong as the kind of third member of what is just a really fun, watchable trio that could, ironically, because in the books they do have their own story, ironically on the screen, I think they could also have had their own show easily. Well, that's not to take anything away from Jessie May Leigh, who, in the role of the heroine, she kind of has to take her newfound power and her position in her stride, but she also has to be humble. She also has to, the way the character is, she often kind of prioritises the friendship she has with Archie Reno's character above saving the world. And her performance isn't particularly flashy, and I think that's just what it needed. One of the main comparisons with the show has been Game of Thrones and stuff like The Witcher, but I think those comparisons are unfair, and I'm sure you're much better acquainted than I with Game of Thrones, with The Witcher, with similar stuff, fantasy stuff. You said this is right up your street because it's fantasy and it ticks boxes for you. But I think making such immediate comparisons to other stuff is unfair, because this is a world created by Leigh Bardugo and, in terms of the show, Eric Heisserer, and I actually think that the stuff that has become synonymous with stuff like Game of Thrones and The Witch, the gratuitous gore and plenty of sex and stuff, I think that the absence of that in this show helps the story and characters develop and the ideas. I know that some people will disagree. I know that one of the pulls for some people in Game of Thrones was the presence of all that stuff, and you'd expect it to be lesser in this show because it's young adult. But I think that helped. I thought that helped the narrative and the characters in this. I don't think it's perfect. My small criticisms would be that, firstly, I think that there is the frequent appearance of characters who have the ability to reverse things, like heal and things like that. And I think in any story, when you introduce that element, you lose some of the sense of consequence and stakes. I remember when we talked about the Umbrella Academy Season 2, I thought that was a problem with that. And in this, there's some degree of that. It's kind of minor, but I think in some sequence, some stuff happens, and then very quickly it'll be reversed, or someone will be there who's able to fix it, type thing. The second thing I would point out is that in amalgamating the two book series, you're naturally going to have to leave some things out of both. And although, like I say, it did seem a pretty seamless combination fusion, but with the strength of those two sets of characters, you can't help but wonder what you might be missing from the original stories. On top of there's always going to be compromises made when it comes to adapting for TV. Having not read the books, I'm not aware of what all of these are in this case. It'd be interesting to hear from those who have read the books what they think about that. But that's a kind of minor thing that I would point out, and there's much more good than bad. I think that the soundtrack's epic. There's an epic soundtrack and anything makes for an epic watch. You think about all the great orchestral soundtracks in any epic show or film, and it's almost synonymous with it. And in this, there's a really great orchestral theme that kind of comes back at the big moments. And a quick shout out to Wendy Partridge's costume design, because the costumes, particularly for the Grisha, are brilliant. I thought looked absolutely terrific. Very colourful, just really fitted with the setting of the Tsarist Russia-inspired world. I think all in all, it's a success because the aspects that have been adapted for the screen work. Particularly that thing about it being a story about dividing lines, both literal and figurative. and it's so much about, but despite all that, it's about unity and setting your allegiances to one side for the greater good. And I think also the other main thing for me was that combining those two storylines successfully was such an important thing, and it does that for me. And the other thing, I think, it's just the fact that you like the characters. I liked almost every character on the screen. Maybe, I mean, it's having got to the end, it's almost easy to forget where the Ben Barnes character starts off at. I don't think it's a badly played character by any means, but I mean, it's a kind of archetypal character. I was much more interested in like the Crow characters. The other thing, there's a really weird accent at one. There's a kind of Scandinavian inspired race, the Fjerdans. There's one character who has a very, very strange accent, and I can't remember the name of the actor off the top of my head. I won't kind of bring it up because that was just a weird moment for me. But other than that, I thought the characters were very, very likeable, very enjoyable to watch, and that's a really important part of any story.